The desert night in northern Syria carried the kind of silence that made men nervous. November 2020, and the war had fractured into 1,000 small conflicts, each more vicious than the last. On a rooftop 3 kilometers from the nearest friendlies, Senior Chief Eleanor Graves sat perfectly still behind a portable signals intelligence array that looked like a briefcase full of antennas and glowing screens. She was 31 years old then, already 8 years deep into work that had no name and left no trace. Her fatigues were unmarked. No rank, no flag, no unit patch. Just dirt and sweat and the kind of anonymity that kept operators breathing in places where breathing was a negotiable condition. The radio in her ear crackled with the controlled panic of men realizing they were about to die. Any station, this is Reaper 2-3. We are taking effective fire from multiple positions. Communications are degrading. We cannot establish comms with TOC. Repeat, we are combat ineffective and need immediate support. Eleanor's fingers moved across her keyboard with the precision of a surgeon making the first cut. The enemy was smart tonight. They were using commercial drones to coordinate their ambush, running their command and control through a civilian 4G cellular network. Clever, untraceable to conventional signals intelligence. But not to her. She had already intercepted the first 3 transmissions. Arabic, excited voices, coordinates being passed, a mortar team setting up, the drone operator calling adjustments. Her screen showed a spiderweb of cellular tower connections, each line representing a conversation happening in the electronic spectrum. Most people thought of signals intelligence as listening to phone calls. Eleanor knew better. It was geometry. It was mathematics. It was the art of finding patterns in noise and turning those patterns into targeting solutions. 90 seconds. That's how long it took her to triangulate the mortar team's position using the timing delays between their transmissions to 3 different cell towers. The numbers resolved into grid coordinates with a confidence interval of 12 meters. She keyed her radio. Her voice was calm, flat, the kind of calm that told men on the wrong end of a firefight that someone competent was in charge. Reaper 2-3, Oracle, I have your solution. Enemy mortar team is at grid November Victor 472189. Recommend immediate air. Danger close. Confirm? A different voice came back, younger, desperate. Oracle, Reaper 2-3, confirmed. We are out of time here. Reaper, Oracle, gunship inbound, 7 seconds. Get down. She had already transmitted the coordinates to the AC-130, circling at 15,000 feet. The crew didn't ask questions, they just fired. The night lit up orange 3 kilometers to her east. The sound reached her 5 seconds later, a rolling thunder that echoed off the hills. The radio again, this time relief instead of panic. Oracle, Reaper 2-3, threat neutralized. You just saved our lives. Who are you? What unit? Eleanor didn't answer. She was already packing her equipment, collapsing antennas, securing the laptop. Her exfiltration window was 4 minutes old. In 6 more minutes, someone would come looking for whoever had just called in an airstrike. She needed to be a ghost by then. Oracle, Reaper 2-3, do you copy? We'd like to thank you properly. She keyed the radio one last time. Reaper, Oracle, stay safe. Oracle out. Then she was moving, low and fast across the rooftop, down the external stairs, into the alley where her vehicle waited. 30 seconds later, she was 2 blocks away. In 5 minutes, she was outside the city limits. In 20 minutes, she was back at the safe house, uploading her mission report to a server that existed in no official directory. Another mission, another team saved. Another name she would never know, attached to voices she would never hear again. Pattern recognition, signal analysis, precision. Emotion was interference. Silence was survival. That was Syria. That was 4 years ago. That was the world where Eleanor Graves made sense. The dining facility at Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek was a different kind of war zone. March 2024, a Thursday afternoon in that dead space between lunch and dinner, when the industrial coffee had gone bitter and the smell of bleach mixed with the ghost of fried chicken. Eleanor sat alone at a small table in the corner. Same table she always chose, back to the wall, eyes on the exits, habits carved so deep they were no longer conscious. Her uniform was crisp enough to cut, the single silver star of a senior chief catching the fluorescent light. But she wore it like camouflage, blending into the background noise of 1,000 separate conversations. She ate with the mechanical efficiency of someone who viewed food as fuel and nothing more. Chicken, rice, black coffee. Her focus was entirely on the plate in front of her movements economical and precise. To the casual observer, she was invisible. Just another senior enlisted sailor grabbing a meal between watch rotations. That invisibility was currency. She had spent 15 years cultivating it. In her world, the world of sensitive, compartmented information facilities and operations that left no paper trail, being loud made you a target. Being unseen made you effective. The relative peace of the dining facility shattered when Gunnery Sergeant Rex Thorne walked in. Thorne moved through the world like a man who owned it. 38 years old, 6'2", 200 pounds of Marine Raider muscle, wrapped in desert tan flight suit, and 15 years of combat experience. His high and tight haircut was fresh. His boots were spit-shined. His bearing screamed, operator. He was flanked by his crew, Staff Sergeant Cole on his left, a thick-necked mountain of a man whose personality was an exact copy of Thorne's, only louder. Sergeant Vance on his right, younger and eager, the kind of Marine who had built his entire identity around being accepted by men like Thorne. They grabbed their trays, and instead of finding an empty table in the half-empty facility, they made a direct line for Eleanor's corner. Thorne dropped his tray onto her table with a bang that made her fork freeze halfway to her mouth. Well, 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 look what we got here, boys. His voice was designed to carry. Heads turned throughout the dining facility. The quiet truce of the afternoon was officially over. A little Navy chief all by her lonesome. Eleanor did not look up. She placed her fork down with surgical precision, her hands coming to rest calmly in her lap. She continued to look at her plate, her expression as readable as a blank wall. Cole leaned his hip against the table, smirking. Probably an admin, pushing papers, making sure our pay gets docked on time. Vance chuckled, directing his words at Eleanor with the kind of condescension that came from men who had never been checked. Hey, Gunny, I heard the Navy's letting everyone be SEALs now. You think she's one of them? He turned his attention fully to Eleanor, his tone dripping with mockery. Excuse me, Chief. You a Navy SEAL? The question hung in the air like smoke. It was a deliberate public jab. The SEAL trident was sacred in the special operations community, and the implication that someone like her, small and quiet and female, could wear it was, in their minds, the height of absurdity. They weren't looking for an answer. They were putting on a show. Eleanor remained silent. Her breathing was even, her posture unchanged. She was a statue carved from military bearing. To Thorne, her silence was the ultimate offense. It wasn't submission. It was a refusal to participate in his theater. It was a denial of his power. What's the matter, Chief? Cat got your tongue? Thorne leaned closer, his shadow falling over her meal. His breath smelled of stale coffee and ego. I asked you a question. We're over here bleeding in the sand, and I want to know if the new Navy is pulling its weight. So are you one of those new, inclusive, politically correct SEALs? The dining facility had gone quiet. Every eye was on the corner table. This was a dominance display, common in the competitive ecosystem of special operations bases, where perceived weakness was blood in the water. Eleanor finally moved. She lifted her eyes from her plate, but not to meet Thorne's gaze. Instead, her eyes swept the room methodically. She clocked the exits, the security camera dome mounted in the ceiling, the faces of the onlookers. She noted a young Army captain watching with a frown, an old Navy Master Chief at a nearby table whose eyes had narrowed into calculating slits. Her gaze came to rest on the digital clock above the serving line. 15:32. Her internal log was made. Documentation over escalation, always. Then, without a word, she picked up her tray, stood, and turned to walk away. She did not acknowledge their presence. She did not answer their question. She simply erased them from her reality. Thorne, caught off guard by the abrupt, silent dismissal, was momentarily speechless. He had expected tears, anger, a protest, something he could feed on. He got nothing. As she walked past, he spoke to her back, his voice tight with fury barely controlled. "That's right, walk away, can't even answer a simple question. Typical." Eleanor did not break her stride. She deposited her tray at the dish return, her movements as smooth and unhurried as they had been a moment before. She pushed through the double doors and was gone, leaving behind a dining facility thick with the residue of Thorne's impotent rage and the silent judgment of the watching crowd. Thorne, Cole, and Vance stood there, the self-proclaimed victors of a battle their opponent had refused to fight. But the silence that followed felt less like victory and more like shouting into an empty room. Cole broke the tension with a forced laugh. "Guess we know who the real warriors are, huh?" Vance nodded, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "She didn't even look at us. What's her problem?" Thorne said nothing. He stared at the door Eleanor had disappeared through, his jaw working. Her silence had done something his enemies in Iraq and Afghanistan had never managed. It had made him feel small. The walk from the dining facility to the sensitive, compartmented information facility was a study in contrasts. Outside, the Virginia air was thick with humidity and the distant roar of F-18 conducting touch-and-go landings. It was a world of physical power, of noise and overt strength, of men and machines moving with violent purpose. The moment Eleanor swiped her badge and the heavy vault-like door to the SCIF hissed shut behind her, that world vanished. Here the air was cold and sterile, recycled through HEPA filters and scrubbed of any contamination. The only sound was the low, constant hum of servers and cooling fans, a digital heartbeat that powered the invisible war. This was her sanctuary. This was her armory. The weapons here were not rifles and explosives. They were algorithms and antennas, and the quiet, relentless pursuit of patterns in electromagnetic noise. She walked past rows of server racks, their blinking green and amber lights reflecting off the polished concrete floor. She entered her personal workspace, a darkened alcove dominated by a wraparound console of 6 monitors. The main screen displayed a slowly rotating holographic projection of the globe, spiderweb with faint lines representing satellite orbits and data streams. She sat down, her posture perfect, and took a single, deep, centering breath. She did not dwell on the humiliation in the dining facility. Humiliation was an emotion. Emotions were inefficient variables. The incident was data. It required processing, not reaction. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with speed and precision that was almost hypnotic. She opened a new file, a simple encrypted text document. At the top she typed, "Incident Report 1532 Zulu / Jeb Little Creek DFAC3. She cataloged the event with the dispassionate clarity of a machine logging sensor data. Personnel involved: Gunnery Sergeant Rex Thorne, USMC, Staff Sergeant Cole, first name unknown, USMC, Sergeant Vance, first name unknown, USMC. Subject of interaction: unsolicited verbal engagement, public mockery of naval service and special warfare designations. Specific query: you a Navy SEAL? My response: disengage without verbal acknowledgement, departed premises. Witnesses of note: Unidentified U.S. Army captain. Master Chief Petty Officer, identity to be confirmed. She accessed the base's unclassified network security feed. It was a simple matter of protocol. Her clearance gave her administrative access to all non-secure camera systems for force protection analysis. She navigated to the archives for DFAC3, timestamp 1530 to 1540. The footage was grainy, the audio tinny and washed out by ambient noise, but it was clear enough. The camera dome she had noted earlier had a perfect angle on her table. She watched the silent movie of her own public hazing. Thorne's aggressive posture, the smirks on the faces of his subordinates, her own stillness, her methodical scan of the room, her clean, silent departure. The video corroborated her report perfectly. Proof. Chain of custody. She downloaded the segment, triple encrypted it with keys that existed on no server the base IT department could access, and attached it to her report. She did not send it. Not yet. A single data point was an anomaly. A pattern was a threat. Thorne had acted as if this was normal behavior for him. She decided to see if the data supported that hypothesis. This was her domain. While men like Thorne were experts in the physical world, in the brutal mechanics of close-quarters combat and direct action raids, Eleanor was a master of the digital one. She began to move through secured databases, her queries like ghosts in the machine, leaving no trace, triggering no alarms. She cross-referenced Thorne's name with incident reports filed on bases he had been stationed at over the last 5 years. It was slow, meticulous work, sifting through thousands of records, looking for needles in digital haystacks. Within an hour, she found it. 2 informal complaints and 1 formal complaint, all filed by junior personnel over the course of 3 years, all citing verbal abuse and public humiliation. The first was from a female Marine corporal at Camp Lejeune, who claimed Thorne had called her a diversity hire in front of her entire platoon during a training exercise. The complaint had been dismissed for lack of corroborating witnesses. The second was from a Navy corpsman attached to a Special Operations Task Force in Afghanistan, who alleged Thorne had publicly belittled his medical advice during a mission debrief, calling him a pogue medic who didn't understand real combat. The complaint had resulted in a counseling statement for Thorne and nothing more. The third was from an Army logistics specialist at Quantico, who reported that Thorne had verbally berated her in front of her team for a supply delay that wasn't her fault, using language that the specialist described as gender-based and demeaning. That complaint had been handled with what the file called informal resolution at the lowest level, which Eleanor recognized as code for swept under the rug. All 3 complaints had been dismissed or minimized. Thorne had friends in high places, and a combat record decorated enough to make leadership hesitant to rein him in. 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, Navy Marine Corps Commendation Medal with a Combat V device. On paper, he was a hero. In practice, he was a bully with institutional protection. Eleanor added the file numbers of these past incidents to her report. The pattern was emerging with mathematical clarity. This wasn't a random act of arrogance. It was a behavioral signature. Thorne was a repeat offender who had learned that the system would protect him as long as his targets didn't fight back. With the initial documentation complete, she pushed the report to a secure, time-locked folder on her personal server partition. It was filed. It was ready, but it was not yet deployed. Escalation required a second, undeniable provocation. Procedure demanded it. Military justice was a system of evidence and corroboration. 1 incident could be explained away. 2 incidents formed a pattern. Patterns could not be dismissed. Restraint was not surrender. It was the governance of power. She leaned back in her chair, her work for the moment complete. She turned her attention to the holographic globe spinning slowly on her main monitor. A small, pulsing red icon had appeared over the South China Sea. A new mission, a new problem to solve. She opened the classified tasking order. The header read, Priority Alpha, SIGINT Anomaly / South China Sea / Time Sensitive. She read quickly, her mind already shifting gears, compartmentalizing the incident with Thorne into a separate mental folder. Unknown signal pattern detected near U.S. carrier strike group conducting freedom of navigation operations. Pattern consistent with adaptive electronic warfare system. Possible Chinese PLA Navy testing new jamming technology. Naval exercise scheduled in 72 hours. If jamming capability is deployed operationally, carrier group communications could be severely degraded. Mission: identify signal source, analyze transmission pattern, develop countermeasure. Time limit: 72 hours. Eleanor's fingers were already moving. She pulled up signal analysis software, began querying satellite intercept data, started building pattern recognition algorithms. This was the real war, the one fought in the electromagnetic spectrum, the one where victory was measured in milliseconds, and defeat meant American ships sailing blind into contested waters. She closed her eyes for a moment, pushing the incident with Thorne completely from her active thoughts. She compartmentalized it, filed it away like the report, ready to be retrieved when needed, but not allowed to interfere with the mission at hand. She had a job to do. The noise of the dining facility faded completely from her memory, replaced by the clean, quiet hum of the servers and the complex mathematical beauty of signal processing. She began her work, her focus absolute. The incident was logged, the pattern was documented, but the day was not over. The mission always came first. Everything else was noise. In his quarters across the base, Rex Thorne sat on the edge of his rack, staring at a challenge coin. It was worn smooth from years of handling, the details almost faded. Oracle. That single word in a set of wings etched into cheap brass. He had sent it anonymously 6 months after Helmand Province. After the nightmares had faded enough that he could think about that day without his hands shaking. After he had stopped waking up to the sound of mortars walking toward his position. March 12, 2018, the day he should have died. The memory was crystal clear even now, 6 years later. The ambush had been perfect. Taliban fighters using Russian equipment, coordinated mortar fire, communications jamming. His team, Mako 3, pinned down in a dry wadi with nowhere to go and no way to call for help. He remembered the panic in his own voice as he tried every frequency, every backup channel, finding nothing but static. He remembered looking at his Marines, seeing the same realization in their eyes. This was it. This was how it ended. Then that voice, calm, female, cutting through the jamming like a knife through fog. Mako 3, Oracle, I have your solution. He had never forgotten the relief that flooded through him. Someone knew where they were. Someone could help. 7 seconds. That's what she had said. Get down, gunship inbound, 7 seconds. They had pressed themselves into the dirt, and the AC-130 had lit up the night. The mortars had stopped. The ambush had ended. 12 Marines had walked away from what should have been a massacre. He had tried to find out who Oracle was, tried through official channels and unofficial ones. Nobody would tell him. Need to know, they said. Operational security. You got your miracle, Gunny. Don't ask questions. So he had sent the coin to an address a sympathetic major had given him. No note, no name. Just the coin and a silent prayer that whoever Oracle was, they knew how grateful he was. 6 years later, he still carried that coin, still thought about that voice, still wondered who had saved him. And now he was failing. He could feel it in his bones. The younger raiders were faster, sharper, more tech-savvy. The missions were changing, becoming more about precision and intelligence than raw aggression. He was becoming obsolete, and he knew it. The base command had made it clear in his last evaluation. Evolve your leadership style, or we'll find someone who can. The words had burned like acid. Leadership style. code for stop being an asshole. But being an asshole was all he knew. Aggression worked. Intimidation worked. It had worked for 15 years. It had made him a gunnery sergeant at 38. It had earned him 2 Bronze Stars. Except now, it wasn't working anymore. Now it was a problem. And that chief in the dining facility, the one who had looked at him like he was furniture, like he didn't even exist, that had triggered something in him, some deep insecurity about being invisible, being forgotten, being replaced by quiet professionals who did their work without fanfare. She reminded him of Oracle, that same calm, that same unshakable control. It made him angry, and he had learned to turn anger into action. Consequences be damned. Cole knocked on his door. Gunny, we were thinking, that chief, we should teach her some respect. Thorne looked up from the coin. What did you have in mind? Training exercise Wednesday night. She'll be out there with the comm gear. We could have a conversation with her. Private. Make sure she understands how things work around here. Vance appeared behind Cole. Yeah, Gunny, can't let her just walk away like that. Makes us look weak. Thorne turned the coin over in his fingers one more time. Then he put it back in his pocket. Wednesday night, but we do this smart. No witnesses, no cameras, just a conversation about respect. Cole grinned. Now you're talking, Gunny. After they left, Thorne sat in the quiet of his room and tried to ignore the small voice in his head that said, this was a mistake. That voice sounded a lot like Oracle. Calm, rational, warning him. He pushed it away. He was a Marine Raider. He didn't take disrespect from anyone. 2 days passed. The base operated on its own rhythm, and Eleanor's life returned to its quiet, focused routine. She spent long hours in the cold, humming confines of the SCIF, her world reduced to the glowing data on her screens and the complex mathematics of electronic warfare. The China mission was proving more difficult than anticipated. The signal pattern was adaptive, changing frequencies in ways that suggested machine learning algorithms on the hostile side. Whoever had designed this jamming system knew what they were doing. She was impressed despite herself. It was elegant work, which meant it was dangerous work. The incident in the dining facility was a stored memory now, a piece of potential evidence awaiting its trigger. She did not speak of it to anyone. She did not alter her schedule. She continued to eat her meals in the same corner of the same dining facility at the same time every day. It was a silent testament to the fact that she would not be displaced or intimidated. She would not change her behavior because 3 men had decided to make her a target. That would be allowing them to control her actions. And Eleanor Graves was not in the business of allowing anyone to control anything about her. Thorne and his crew saw her there. They swaggered past her table on multiple occasions, sometimes making loud, pointed comments about paper pushers or desk jockeys within her earshot. But they did not confront her directly again. Her complete lack of reaction to the first incident had clearly perplexed them. They had expected a fight or a formal complaint, something tangible they could mock or crush or use to justify their original harassment. Her silence was like punching water. It offered no resistance, yet it could not be defeated. This gnawed at Thorne. In his world, a challenge unanswered was a challenge won, but he felt no sense of victory. He felt ignored. And for a man whose entire identity was built on being seen, being feared, being acknowledged as the apex predator, being ignored was worse than being opposed. It was intolerable. On the evening of the second day, Eleanor was working late in the SCIF when she received a message on her secure terminal. It was from Master Chief Petty Officer Garrett Wolfe, the Command Master Chief she had noticed watching the dining facility incident. The message was brief. Senior Chief, coffee tomorrow, 0700, Building 42, conference room. Your choice to attend, MCPO Wolfe. Eleanor read it twice. Wolfe was old-school Navy, a man with 30 years of service etched into his weathered face and 3 rows of ribbons on his chest. He had a reputation as someone who looked out for his sailors, but didn't tolerate fools or politics. She considered declining. She didn't need a protector or a mentor. She had managed her career just fine without either. But Wolf hadn't phrased it as an order. He had phrased it as an invitation. That suggested respect, not paternalism. She typed a short reply, 0700, I'll be there. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at Building 42 at exactly 0700. Wolf was already there, 2 cups of black coffee on the table. He gestured to one. Figured you for black, no sugar, was I right? You were right, Master Chief. They sat across from each other. Wolf studied her with a kind of gaze that saw past uniforms and rank insignia. He had the eyes of a man who had seen a lot and forgotten very little. I was in the DFAC 2 days ago, he said without preamble. I saw what happened with Gunny Thorne. Eleanor said nothing. She sipped her coffee and waited. I also saw how you handled it, Wolf continued. Most people in your position would have made a scene, or filed a complaint immediately, or at minimum looked rattled. You did none of those things. You documented, disengaged, and departed. That's not standard training. That's operational discipline. Eleanor met his eyes. Is there a question, Master Chief? Wolf smiled slightly. No question, just an observation. I've been in the Navy a long time, Senior Chief. I've worked with a lot of different communities. SEALs, EOD, SWCC, submarine force, surface warfare. You learn to recognize the signatures, the way people carry themselves, the way they think. He paused, taking a slow sip of his coffee. You don't carry yourself like someone who works in a building all day. You carry yourself like someone who's used to operating in places where mistakes have permanent consequences. Eleanor's expression remained neutral. I work in signals intelligence, Master Chief. It's important work, but it's not door-kicking. I'm not saying it is, Wolf replied. I'm saying there are different kinds of operators. Some are kinetic, some are not. But they all have the same look in their eyes, the same way of assessing a room, the same calmness under pressure. He leaned forward slightly. I'm also saying that if Gunny Thorne or his crew escalate this situation, you're going to have people in your corner. Senior enlisted leadership on this base is watching. We don't like bullies, and we don't like people who think their job title makes them better than everyone else. Eleanor considered this. It was an offer of support, genuine support, not performative allyship. Wolf was telling her that if things went sideways, she wouldn't be fighting alone. I appreciate that, Master Chief, but I can handle this. I'm sure you can, Wolf said. I'm just saying you don't have to handle it alone if you don't want to. He stood, drained the last of his coffee. Also, for what it's worth, I ran into a colleague of mine last night, old SEAL chief I served with in Iraq. I mentioned your name in passing, just to see if he knew you. He got real quiet. Then he said, and I quote, if Eleanor Graves is on this base and someone is giving her trouble, that someone is about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between being a warrior and being a fighter. Wolf paused at the door. He wouldn't elaborate, wouldn't even confirm he knew you, just gave me that 1,000-yard stare and walked away, which tells me everything I need to know. Master Chief, Eleanor said quietly, I'd prefer if my name wasn't circulated. Understood, Senior Chief. Consider it forgotten. But my offer stands. If you need anything, you know where to find me. He left. Eleanor sat alone with her coffee, processing the conversation. Wolf had recognized something in her. That was both useful and dangerous. Useful because it meant she had an ally with institutional authority. Danger because it meant her cover as just another technical specialist was thinner than she'd thought. She finished her coffee and headed back to the SCIF. The China mission was entering its critical phase. She had identified the jamming signal's base frequency and was building a machine learning filter to separate the hostile transmissions from legitimate traffic. It was delicate work, requiring hours of uninterrupted focus. As she walked across the base, she noticed Thorne's pickup truck in the parking lot near the training offices. Through the window, she could see him gesturing animatedly to Cole and Vance. They looked like men making plans. Eleanor filed the observation and kept walking. If they wanted to escalate, that was their choice. She was prepared either way. Documentation over escalation. Correction over punishment. Proof above all. The system would work. It always did. You just had to feed it the right data and be patient enough to let it process. She was very good at patience. The escalation came on Wednesday evening, exactly as Eleanor had predicted it would. A joint force training exercise was scheduled for Thursday morning. A complex amphibious assault simulation involving Marines, Navy, and Army units. Eleanor's role was to oversee the deployment of a mobile signals intelligence package that would play the part of a near-peer adversary's electronic warfare unit during the exercise. Her job was to monitor the exercise's electronic spectrum, to simulate enemy jamming and signals collection, and to provide feedback afterward on the friendly forces' emissions control. It was realistic training that helped units understand how vulnerable they were to electronic surveillance and attack. She was walking from the temporary command post to a satellite communications truck, carrying a ruggedized laptop loaded with the exercise parameters. The staging area was a chaotic maze of vehicles, concertina wire, and portable generators. The sun was setting, casting long, deep shadows that turned the familiar landscape into something alien and fragmented. 30 minutes earlier, she had sent an encrypted message to Master Chief Wolf. The message was simple. Training Area Bravo, 1845. Recommend Observation Position Grid Charlie 3. Operational security matter. Wolf had understood immediately. He had positioned himself and a young Army lieutenant named Avery Brennan in the shadows near a Humvee, 100 yards from where Eleanor was walking. Good lines of sight, close enough to observe, far enough to be out of immediate danger. Eleanor's body camera was activated. A small red light blinked on the device clipped to her belt, invisible unless you knew to look for it. Vance materialized from behind the supply crates. They had planned this, chosen the location, waited for the right moment. Eleanor stopped walking. Her left hand held the laptop. Her right hand was free. Her eyes flickered across the scene in less than a second, taking in every detail with the systematic precision of a professional. No security cameras in this area. The nearest group of personnel was 100 yards away, their backs turned, focused on their own preparations. The lighting was poor. The noise from the generators would mask conversation. This was a calculated ambush. These men had learned nothing from her silence. They had interpreted her restraint as weakness rather than control. They were about to learn the difference. "We need to have a little chat, Chief," Thorne said, his voice low and menacing. The performative bravado of the dining facility was gone, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. "You think you're pretty smart, don't you? Just walking away, making me look like a fool." Eleanor's expression remained neutral. Her voice when she spoke was calm and even. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him. "I don't know what you're talking about, Gunnery Sergeant." Cole sneered. "Oh, now she talks. Miracles do happen." Thorne took a step closer, invading her personal space with deliberate intent. "See, here's the thing. On this base, respect is earned, and you haven't earned it. You walk around with that star on your collar like you're something special. But you're just a technician, a glorified radio operator. We're the tip of the spear. You're the person who sharpens it. Know your place." Eleanor's gaze remained steady, her voice unchanged. "My place is right here, Gunnery Sergeant. I have a job to do. I suggest you let me do it." Thorne laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. "She's got fire. I like it." He took another step. He was almost chest to chest with her now, using his size to intimidate, to dominate the space. "But you still haven't answered my question, the one from the other day. Are you a SEAL? It's a simple yes or no." Eleanor's eyes remained locked on his face. "That information is not relevant to my duties." Thorne's face darkened. His jaw clenched. "Not relevant? It's the only thing that's relevant. Are you a warrior or are you a REMF? That's what I'm asking." He jabbed a thick finger into her shoulder, punctuating his words with physical contact, crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. Eleanor's eyes dropped to his hand on her shoulder, then back to his face. There was no fear in her expression. There was nothing. It was like looking at a camera lens, observing, recording, processing. "Remove your hand, Gunnery Sergeant." The words were not a request. They were not a plea. They were a statement of fact, delivered in the same tone she might use to read a weather report. This was the final trigger for Thorne. A woman, a Navy chief, a technician, giving him a direct order. It was the ultimate transgression against every crude hierarchy of physical dominance that he had built his identity upon. His entire worldview snapped. "You don't give me orders." And then he threw the punch. It wasn't a wild haymaker. It was a short, brutal right cross aimed directly at her jaw. The kind of punch designed to end a fight before it started, to assert dominance through immediate, overwhelming violence. He had put all his weight behind it, all his frustration, all his wounded pride. He was fast, but he was predictable. Violence, like radio waves, followed patterns. Thorne's pattern was aggression, forward pressure, overwhelming force. Eleanor's pattern was precision. The world seemed to slow down in the space between heartbeats, resolving into a series of clear geometric angles and vectors of force. His punch was a straight line. It could be met, or it could be redirected. Eleanor redirected. As his fist traveled the last few inches toward her face, she did not step back. She stepped in, closing the distance, turning her body in a subtle 45-degree pivot on the ball of her left foot. His fist, aimed at where her head had been, flew harmlessly past her ear. His momentum was a gift. She accepted it. Her right hand came up, not to block, but to guide. Her palm made contact with the back of his triceps, pushing his arm further along its trajectory, exaggerating his forward motion. At the same time, her left hand, still holding the ruggedized laptop, came up and across. She didn't hit him with it. She used its hard, flat edge to press firmly into the side of his extended elbow joint, applying pressure against the direction it was designed to bend. Thorne, overextended and off balance, felt a sickening electric jolt shoot through his arm. He let out a grunt of pain and surprise as his arm was forced into a hyperextended lock. His forward momentum, now controlled entirely by Eleanor, carried him stumbling past her. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. Cole and Vance had been watching with confident smirks, expecting to see the chief crumple to the ground, expecting Thorne to teach her the lesson they all thought she needed. They were frozen for a critical second, their brains struggling to process the impossible scene that had just unfolded. A 190-pound Marine Raider had just been effortlessly dismantled by a woman half his size. That second was all Eleanor needed. As Thorne stumbled past, she released her grip on his arm and continued her spin. Vance was closer now, his hands just starting to come up in a delayed defensive reaction. Eleanor's right leg swept out in a low, clean arc, her boot connecting precisely with the back of his left ankle. It wasn't a kick, it was a removal of structural support. Vance's leg buckled beneath him, and with a yelp of surprise, he crashed to the asphalt, his fall clumsy and uncontrolled. 4 seconds had elapsed since Thorne threw his punch. Cole was the last one standing. He was bigger than Thorne, a mountain of muscle, and he finally broke out of his stupor and charged forward, his hands reaching out to grab her. He was counting on his size and strength to solve the problem that skill had created. It was another predictable pattern. Eleanor met his charge not with resistance, but with alignment. As his hands were about to grab her shoulders, she dropped her center of gravity, sinking into a low, stable stance. She brought her forearms up inside his reach, creating a wedge. His grabbing hands slid harmlessly up her arms, unable to find purchase. Now she was inside his reach, where his power and size were diminished. Her left hand shot up and cupped the back of his neck, pulling his head down with sudden, controlled force. Simultaneously, her right shoulder drove upward into his sternum. The combined forces, his own forward momentum, plus her pull from above and her push from below, folded him in half like a cheap suit. The air rushed out of his lungs in a pained whoosh. He was disoriented, his vision blurring, his equilibrium completely destroyed. Eleanor used his bent-over posture to her advantage. She stepped to his side, hooking her leg behind his, and pivoted again, using his own weight to guide him to the ground. He landed hard on his side, dazed and breathless. 8 seconds. Thorne had managed to regain his footing. His face was a mask of disbelief and incandescent fury. His right arm hung uselessly at his side, the elbow already beginning to swell. He turned and faced her, letting out a roar of pure animal rage. He lunged. Eleanor simply took one step to the side. Thorne, blinded by anger, and with his equilibrium already compromised by the arm injury, stumbled past her again. She placed a calm hand on his back and gave him a firm, steady push. He tripped over Vance's still sprawled legs and went down in a heap of tangled limbs and profane cursing. It was over. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by the steady hum of the generators and the ragged, pained breathing of 3 men sprawled on the asphalt. Senior Chief Eleanor Graves stood in the center of it all, her breathing perfectly calm, her uniform barely disturbed. She hadn't even dropped the laptop. She took a small step back, creating distance. Her right hand moved to a discreet device clipped to her belt. A small red light, which had been blinking softly throughout the entire encounter, turned solid. She had activated her body camera the moment Thorne had stepped out of the shadows. The entire encounter, from his first word to his final ignominious fall, was recorded in high-definition video and audio. Documentation over escalation. Correction over punishment. Proof. She stood there for another 10 seconds, the camera silently recording the aftermath. Thorne, propped on one elbow, stared at her with an expression that cycled rapidly through pain, humiliation, and for the first time in his adult life, genuine fear. He had mistaken stillness for weakness. He had mistaken silence for submission. He had mistaken a technician for a target. He had been catastrophically wrong on all counts. Without a word, Eleanor turned and continued her walk toward the satellite communications truck. Her footsteps were steady and sure on the asphalt, the sound of her boots fading into the background noise of generators and distant voices. She left them there in the darkness. 3 defeated predators in a cage of their own making. The pivot was complete. The evidence was secured. The correction was now inevitable. From the shadows near the command post, 2 figures had witnessed the entire silent ballet of violence. Master Chief Petty Officer Garrett Wolfe stood next to a wide-eyed Army lieutenant named Avery Brennan. They had been walking toward the same communications truck when Thorne and his men had appeared. Wolfe had held the lieutenant back with a firm hand on his arm, sensing that something was about to happen, trusting his instincts. Lieutenant Brennan stared at the spot where Eleanor had been standing, his mouth slightly open in shock. What just happened? Did you see that? She didn't even break a sweat. Master Chief Wolfe took a slow drag from a cigarette he hadn't realized he'd lit, blowing the smoke out in a long, thoughtful plume. His eyes were fixed on the three Marines, slowly, painfully picking themselves up from the ground. "Lieutenant," Wolf said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "What you just saw was the difference between a fighter and a warrior." "A fighter?" Brennan was confused. "Gunny Thorne is a raider. He's one of the most decorated fighters on this base." "Exactly," Wolf nodded slowly. "He's a fighter. He looks for fights. He escalates. He uses rage and strength. It's loud. It's messy. It works most of the time." He took another drag of his cigarette. "But a warrior? A warrior governs violence. They don't seek it. They don't enjoy it. They simply apply it when necessary, with absolute precision, to achieve a specific outcome. Then they turn it off." Brennan looked from the pathetic sight of Thorne nursing his injured arm to the empty space where Eleanor had vanished into the gathering darkness. Her technique. It wasn't Marine Corps martial arts. It wasn't anything I've ever seen. "It's not supposed to be seen," Wolf corrected him calmly. "That was sistema. Maybe some Aikido principles mixed in. All leverage and redirection. No wasted energy. You don't learn that in a line company, Lieutenant. You learn that in places we don't talk about, for jobs we don't admit exist." The young lieutenant was beginning to understand. The quiet chief from the dining facility, the one everyone ignored or dismissed, was something else entirely. The incident hadn't been a case of a timid officer being bullied. It had been a case of a predator poking a creature it fundamentally did not comprehend. "So what happens now?" Brennan asked, his professional curiosity overriding his shock. "They assaulted a senior chief. That's a court-martial offense." Wolf flicked his cigarette into the dirt, grinding it out with his boot. Now we see how the system works. Thorne and his boys made two mistakes tonight. The first was picking the fight. He gestured with his chin toward the three Marines, who were now arguing amongst themselves in hushed, angry tones, probably trying to construct a story that didn't make them look like complete fools. The second was making it a documented event. "Documented?" Brennan pointed out. "There are no cameras here." Wolf gave the lieutenant a wry, knowing smile. "Son, a woman like that is never undocumented. She knew they were there before they stepped out of the shadows. She chose the ground. She controlled the timing. And I bet my entire pension that she recorded every single second of it." As if on cue, a pair of military police vehicles, their lights off, rolled quietly into the staging area. They weren't responding to a call. They were moving with the quiet, purposeful efficiency of a prearranged rendezvous. An MP sergeant stepped out and approached Thorne, who immediately began to bluster and protest, pointing at his injured arm, gesturing toward where Eleanor had disappeared. Wolf nodded to himself, satisfied. "See, the system is already working. She would have sent the file to base security the second she was clear of the area. No yelling, no running to the commanding officer, just a quiet, encrypted data packet with video evidence and a formal complaint. That's how she fights." The Master Chief looked at Lieutenant Brennan, whose expression had shifted from confusion to a deep, profound respect, mixed with something approaching awe. "Let this be a lesson, Lieutenant. The most dangerous people in the room are never the loudest. They're the ones you don't even notice until it's too late." He clapped the young officer on the shoulder. "Come on, let's go make our statements to the MPs. We're witnesses to an assault. Our testimony matters." As they walked toward the military police vehicles, Brennan glanced back one last time at the scene. The image was burned into his mind. Three of the self-proclaimed toughest men on the base, men who wore their aggression like armor, being quietly and professionally detained by military police. Their night of violent bravado had been brought to an end by a silent, precise countermove they never saw coming. The culture of the base had just been subjected to a sudden, sharp correction, and the shock waves were only just beginning to spread. Eleanor Graves reached the satellite communications truck 90 seconds after the encounter ended. Her breathing remained perfectly even, her stride unchanged from her normal walking pace. To anyone who might have glanced her way, She appeared to be just another senior chief going about her duties on a Wednesday evening. Inside, her mind was processing the incident with the systematic efficiency of a computer executing a well-designed program. She entered the truck, set the ruggedized laptop on the communications console, and pulled out her personal encrypted phone. 2 messages, both sent before she typed a single word. The first went to base security through an automated system she had configured years ago. The message was simple, clinical, and devastating. Assault incident reported. Senior Chief Eleanor Graves. 3 suspects. Video evidence attached. Grid coordinates included. Witnesses present. The body camera footage uploaded automatically, pulled from the small device on her belt through a secure Bluetooth connection. 5 minutes of high-definition video, crystal clear audio, irrefutable evidence. The second message went to a different server entirely, one that existed in no official directory, maintained by an organization with a 3-letter acronym that most people had heard of, but few understood. The message header read, Operational Security Breach / Tier 1. Operator subjected to hostile contact, CONUS / immediate review recommended. This message would trigger a different kind of response, one that moved through channels most base commanders never saw. Both messages sent, Eleanor allowed herself a single deep breath. Then she returned her attention to the original reason she had walked to this truck. The training exercise communications package still needed to be configured. The mission continued regardless of personal drama. She opened the laptop and began running diagnostic checks on the satellite uplink. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, her mind already compartmentalizing the assault into a separate mental folder, sealed and stored for later processing. 15 minutes later, she saw the military police vehicles arrive through the truck's small window. She watched Master Chief Wolf and Lieutenant Brennan approach the MPs, saw them gesture toward the location of the assault, saw Thorne being helped to his feet, his right arm cradled against his chest. The system was working exactly as designed. Eleanor finished her equipment checks, locked the truck, and began the walk back to the SCIF. She had a more pressing problem waiting for her there. A problem that involved the Chinese Navy and a carrier strike group that was currently sailing blind into what could become a very expensive international incident. The SCIF was quiet when Eleanor entered at 2200 hours. Most of the day shift had gone home. Only a skeleton crew remained, monitoring ongoing operations in different time zones. She nodded to the watch officer and made her way to her alcove. The main screen displayed the same holographic globe she had left hours earlier, but now the small red icon over the South China Sea was pulsing more urgently. She sat down and opened the classified message traffic. Priority Alpha, upgraded to imminent threat. Her eyes scanned the intelligence summary rapidly. The signal pattern she had been tracking for the past 3 days wasn't a test. It was an active deployment. Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy electronic warfare units had positioned their new jamming system aboard 3 vessels operating in international waters near the Spratly Islands. The system was currently in standby mode, but signals intelligence from the National Security Agency indicated it would go active within 48 hours. The timing was not coincidental. A U.S. Navy carrier strike group led by the USS Theodore Roosevelt was scheduled to conduct a freedom of navigation operation through those same waters in exactly 48 hours. If the Chinese jamming system went active during the transit, the carrier group's satellite communications would be degraded by an estimated 70 to 80%, potentially more. $10 billion in naval assets, 5,000 sailors, and the entire strategic calculus of American presence in the South China Sea, all dependent on Eleanor solving a mathematical problem before time ran out. She pulled up the signal analysis data she had been compiling. The jamming system was sophisticated, more sophisticated than anything the Chinese had fielded before. It used orthogonal frequency division multiplexing combined with adaptive frequency hopping, controlled by what appeared to be a machine learning algorithm. The system could predict which frequencies the American SATCOM would jump to and preemptively jam them. It was elegant, almost beautiful in its design, which made it exceptionally dangerous. Eleanor began building her countermeasure. The mathematics were complex, requiring her to essentially teach a computer to recognize the difference between legitimate satellite communications and hostile jamming that was specifically designed to look like legitimate communications. She worked through the night. At 0300 hours, Lieutenant Avery Brennan appeared at her workspace carrying 2 cups of black coffee. He set one down beside her keyboard without saying a word. Eleanor glanced at him, then at the coffee, then back to her screen. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I saw what happened tonight," Brennan said quietly. "With Gunny Thorne." Eleanor's fingers continued typing. "Then you'll be contacted by the Judge Advocate General's office for a statement." "I've already given my statement to the MPS. Master Chief Wolf and I both did." He paused. "That was the most controlled application of force I've ever witnessed." "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Eleanor stopped typing. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Lieutenant, I'm going to give you the same advice Master Chief Wolf gave me when I first started doing this work. The less you know about where someone learned their skills, the easier it is for you to sleep at night." She turned back to her screen. "But I appreciate you being there. Your testimony will matter." Brennan nodded slowly. "Master Chief said you were something different. He wouldn't elaborate, but he said you work in places that don't appear on maps." Eleanor allowed a small smile. "Master Chief Wolf talks too much. He also said you were probably the most dangerous person on this entire base." "Master Chief Wolf definitely talks too much." Eleanor's smile faded. "Go get some sleep, Lieutenant. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Brennan left. Eleanor returned to her work, but something had shifted. Wolf and Brennan had witnessed the assault. They had given statements. The institutional machinery of military justice was now in motion. More importantly, they had seen her in action. Her cover as just another signals intelligence technician was compromised. That would have consequences. Some good, some complicated. She pushed the thought aside. The mission demanded her full attention. She had 36 hours to solve an unsolvable problem. By hour 12 of her marathon work session, Eleanor had identified the key vulnerability in the Chinese jamming system. It was hiding its hostile signals by using the same frequencies as commercial Starlink satellite internet. Brilliant camouflage, but not perfect. The hostile signals had a slightly different modulation pattern, detectable only through deep packet inspection and pattern analysis. She began training a machine learning model to recognize those subtle differences. She fed it 10,000 signal samples, half legitimate Starlink traffic, and half simulated jamming based on the intercepts her team had collected. The algorithm learned to distinguish between the two with increasing accuracy. By hour 24, she had achieved 94% accuracy. Not good enough. At 94%, 6% of the carrier group's communications would still be jammed. That could mean the difference between coordinated operations and chaos. She refined the algorithm, adjusted the parameters, ran the simulation again. 95.3%. Better. Still not good enough. At hour 30, exhaustion was beginning to creep in at the edges of her consciousness. She had been awake for nearly 40 hours, sustained by coffee and the particular kind of focus that came from knowing that failure was not an option. She ran the simulation again with new parameters. 97.3%. Eleanor stared at the number. 97.3% meant that 2.7% of communications would still be degraded. Acceptable parameters. Not perfect, but acceptable. In the real world, perfect was the enemy of good enough. She packaged the countermeasure algorithm into a deployable software patch. She encrypted it with keys that only the carrier strike group's communications officers would have. She uploaded it to the secure military satellite network with a priority flash message header. Urgent, SATCOM countermeasure, / deploy immediately to all carrier strike group comm systems, / time sensitive. The upload completed at hour 36. She had 12 hours of margin before the carrier group entered contested waters. Eleanor allowed herself to lean back in her chair. She closed her eyes for just a moment, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. She had done it. The carrier group would sail with functional communications. The Chinese jamming system would activate and accomplish precisely nothing. American strategic presence in the South China Sea would continue uninterrupted. And nobody outside of this building and a handful of people in the Pentagon would ever know it had been threatened in the first place. This was the invisible war, the one fought in the electromagnetic spectrum, the one where victory meant that nothing happened, which meant nobody noticed, which meant no credit and no recognition. Just the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved and lives protected. Her phone buzzed. A message from the watch officer. Senior Chief, recommend you get some rest. You've been here for 36 hours straight. We can monitor the deployment. Eleanor typed a short reply. Acknowledged, heading out. She saved her work, secured her terminal, and stood up. Her body protested with the kind of stiffness that came from sitting too long in one position. She walked out of the SCIF into the early morning Virginia air. It was Thursday, 0600 hours. The sun was just beginning to rise over the base. The world was waking up to a normal day, completely unaware that a potential crisis had been averted while they slept. Eleanor allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. Then she pushed it away and started walking toward her quarters. She had 4 hours to sleep before the Judge Advocate General's office would almost certainly call her in for an interview about the assault. The China mission was complete. Now the Thorn situation would demand her attention. 2 different battles, 2 different battlefields, but the same core principle applied to both. Patience, precision, proof. The system would work. She just had to feed it the right data and trust the process. 4 hours of sleep was enough. Eleanor woke at 10:00 hours to 3 missed calls and a text message from a Navy commander she didn't recognize. The message was professionally terse. Senior Chief Graves, this is Commander Patricia Nash, Base JAG. Need to schedule interview regarding incident Wednesday evening. Please call at your earliest convenience. Eleanor called back immediately. Commander Nash answered on the second ring. Senior Chief Graves, thank you for getting back to me so quickly. I need to interview you regarding the assault complaint you filed last night. Are you available this afternoon? Yes, ma'am. What time? 1400 hours. Building 18. Conference Room B. This is just an initial interview to get your statement on record. You have the right to have counsel present if you wish. Eleanor considered this. Having a lawyer present would signal that she viewed this as adversarial. It would put the JAG office on the defensive. That wasn't what she wanted. She wanted the system to process the evidence objectively. I don't need counsel, ma'am. I'll be there at 1400. Understood. See you then. Eleanor spent the next 2 hours preparing. She reviewed her own incident report, watched the body camera footage 3 times, made notes about specific timestamps and details that would be relevant to the legal case. She approached the preparation the same way she would approach mission planning. Thorough, systematic, leaving nothing to chance. At 13:45, she walked into Building 18. Commander Nash was waiting in the conference room with a court reporter and a digital recording system. Nash was in her early 40s, with short dark hair and the kind of professional demeanor that came from someone who had spent years prosecuting complex cases. Senior Chief, please have a seat. This interview is being recorded and transcribed. You're not under investigation. You're the complainant and victim in this case. I need to get your account of what happened so we can determine how to proceed. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Nash walked her through the incident step by step. Eleanor's answers were precise and unemotional. She described the dining facility harassment, her decision to document rather than escalate, her research into Thorne's history of similar behavior, and finally the assault itself. When she got to the assault, Nash stopped her. "Senior Chief, I've reviewed the body camera footage. It's extremely clear, but I need to understand your mindset during the encounter. When Gunnery Sergeant Thorne put his hand on your shoulder and you told him to remove it, what were you thinking?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I was thinking that he had just committed assault by making unwanted physical contact. I was thinking that I needed to give him one clear verbal warning, which would be documented on the recording. I was thinking that if he escalated beyond that warning, I would need to respond with the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat and create distance. And when he threw the punch, I was thinking that three hostile individuals had attempted to cause me grievous bodily harm in an isolated area with no immediate help available. I was thinking that I needed to disable all three threats as quickly as possible and then disengage." Nash leaned forward slightly. "Senior Chief, most people in that situation would be thinking about survival, about fear. You're describing tactical analysis." Eleanor met her eyes. "Commander, I've been in situations where survival depended on tactical analysis. It's how I'm trained to think." "What kind of training teaches you to disable three trained Marines in 12 seconds without causing any serious injuries?" Eleanor paused. This was the question she had been expecting, the one that would require her to navigate the boundary between what she could say and what she couldn't. "Ma'am, my service record indicates that I work in signals intelligence. That's accurate. What it doesn't indicate, because it's classified, is that signals intelligence operators in my particular unit sometimes deploy to forward positions in denied areas. We receive additional training in escape and evasion, resistance to interrogation, and personal combatives. That training is designed to allow us to break contact and evade if we're compromised in a hostile environment." It was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. But it was enough. Nash nodded slowly. "I'm going to need to make some calls. Your service record has some unusual flags on it. There's a contact number for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Do you know anything about that?" "Yes, ma'am. Standard protocol for personnel with certain clearances and assignments. If there's any legal or disciplinary matter, DNI gets notified. It's mostly administrative." "Mostly?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss my operational background in detail, ma'am, but I can tell you that the body camera footage shows exactly what happened. Three men ambushed me. I defended myself using appropriate force. I'm prepared to testify to that under oath." Nash studied her for a long moment. "Senior Chief, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I can usually read people pretty well. And what I'm reading from you is that you're probably the calmest assault victim I've ever interviewed. You're not angry. You're not traumatized. You're not looking for revenge. You're just processing this like it's a problem to be solved." Eleanor allowed a small smile. "That's an accurate assessment, ma'am. Why file the complaint then? Why not just let it go?" "Because Gunnery Sergeant Thorne has a pattern of this behavior. I found 3 previous complaints in his record, all dismissed or minimized. If I don't file, the pattern continues. Someone else becomes his target, probably someone who doesn't have my training or my ability to defend themselves. Filing the complaint isn't about revenge, it's about correction." Nash sat back, her expression shifting to something approaching respect. "That's a very institutional way of looking at it." "The institution works, ma'am. You just have to feed it the right data." The interview continued for another 30 minutes. Nash asked about the previous dining facility incident, about Eleanor's decision-making process, about whether she felt threatened or feared for her safety. Eleanor answered every question with the same calm precision. Finally, Nash closed her folder. "All right, Senior Chief. I have what I need. I'm going to review this with my team and with Base Command. I'll also be calling the number in your service record to notify DNI as required. You'll be contacted when we schedule the Article 32 hearing. Article 32, ma'am? Not just NJP? Senior Chief, this was a premeditated assault on a senior enlisted leader by 3 Marines acting in concert. It was captured on video. We have 2 independent witnesses who corroborate your account. This is going to an Article 32 preliminary hearing at minimum. Depending on how Gunnery Sergeant Thorne and his crew want to play it, this could go to a full court-martial. Nash stood. Between us, Senior Chief, that footage is the most clear-cut case of self-defense I've ever seen. You gave multiple verbal warnings. You used minimal force. You created distance as soon as the threats were neutralized. If this goes to trial, the defense is going to have a very bad day. Eleanor stood as well. Thank you, ma'am. One more thing, Nash hesitated. Master Chief Wolf called me this morning. He wanted to make sure I understood that he and Lieutenant Brennan had been positioned to observe because you had sent Master Chief an encrypted message 30 minutes before the assault. Is that accurate? Eleanor had wondered when this would come up. Yes, ma'am. I had reason to believe Gunnery Sergeant Thorne was planning to escalate. I wanted witnesses positioned in case my assessment was correct. So you walked into that ambush deliberately. I walked my normal route to perform my assigned duties, ma'am. I just made sure there were credible witnesses nearby if anything happened. Nash shook her head slowly, a wry smile on her face. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most calculating. I can't decide which. Why can't it be both, ma'am? Nash laughed, a genuine sound. Fair point, Senior Chief, fair point. You're dismissed. I'll be in touch. Eleanor left Building 18 and checked her phone. Another message, this one from Master Chief Wolf. Coffee? Same place as before? She texted back. 20 minutes. When she arrived at the Building 42 conference room, Wolf was waiting with 2 cups of coffee and a knowing expression. So how'd it go with the JAG? About as expected, Master Chief. She asked good questions. I gave honest answers. The system is working. Wolf nodded. I got a call from CDR Nash this morning. She wanted to confirm that you'd sent me a message before the assault. I told her the truth, that you'd sent me an encrypted text suggesting I observe a certain grid location at a certain time for operational security reasons. I appreciate you being there, Master Chief. Question is, how'd you know they were going to hit you last night? You some kind of psychic? Eleanor smiled. No, Master Chief. I'm just good at patterns. Thorne and his crew had been watching me for 2 days. They were planning something. The training exercise provided the perfect opportunity. Isolated area, poor lighting, legitimate reason for me to be there. It was predictable. So you set up your own ambush. I documented a potential threat and ensured appropriate witnesses were positioned to observe if that threat materialized. That's not an ambush. That's operational planning. Wolf laughed and shook his head. You know what, Senior Chief? I've been in the Navy for 30 years. I've worked with SEALs, worked with submariners, worked with aviators. You're the first person I've ever met who treats a physical assault like it's a chess problem. Chess is about controlling the board, Master Chief. So is this. Wolf's expression grew more serious. There's something you should know. The Raider community is starting to close ranks around Thorne. There's a petition circulating saying he's being railroaded, that this is politically motivated, that you provoked him. Eleanor sipped her coffee. That's expected. Tribal loyalty is a powerful force. Doesn't that bother you? Master Chief, I have video evidence of 3 men committing premeditated assault. I have 2 credible witnesses. I have a documented pattern of prior behavior. The tribal loyalty of the Raider community is irrelevant to the facts of the case. You're not worried about the social consequences? You're going to have a target on your back. Eleanor set down her coffee and met Wolf's eyes. Master Chief, I've had targets on my back in places a lot more dangerous than a Navy base in Virginia. I'll survive this. Wolf studied her for a long moment. You know what I think? I think CDR Nash is right. I think you're either the bravest person on this base or the most dangerous. Maybe both. I'm just a signals intelligence technician, Master Chief. Right, and I'm just a simple sailor who happened to witness the most controlled application of violence I've ever seen outside of a training film. Wolf leaned forward. Look, I'm not asking you to confirm or deny anything, but I've been around long enough to recognize operators when I see them. Whatever you really do, whoever you really are, just know that you've got allies. The senior enlisted leadership on this base is watching this situation. We don't like bullies, and we don't like people who think their job makes them better than everyone else. I appreciate that, Master Chief, truly. One more thing. Lieutenant Brennan asked to transfer to your division. He submitted the paperwork this morning, said he wants to learn from you. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. He does realize I spend most of my time staring at computer screens, right? I think he realizes you do a lot more than that. Kid's smart. He saw something last night that changed his understanding of what's possible. He wants to be part of it. Eleanor considered this. Having Brennan as her deputy could be useful. He was intelligent, observant, and most importantly, he had proven he could be trusted to witness a crisis and not panic. If the transfer gets approved, I'll take him. It'll get approved, Wolf said confidently. Captain Ashford is watching this situation closely. She's not happy about what happened. She's also very interested in who you are and what you do. That could be complicated, or it could be useful. Captain Ashford is pragmatic. She cares about mission effectiveness and good order and discipline. You represent both. Thorne represents neither. Wolf stood. Anyway, I wanted to give you a heads up about the Raider community closing ranks. Don't let it get to you. The truth has a way of coming out, especially when it's recorded in high-definition video. Thank you, Master Chief. After Wolf left, Eleanor sat alone with her coffee, thinking about what was coming. The Article 32 hearing, the testimony, the inevitable moment when her operational background would be revealed, at least partially, in open court. She had known this was possible from the moment she filed the complaint, but it had been necessary. Thorne's pattern of behavior had to be stopped. The culture that enabled him had to be corrected. Personal cost was irrelevant. The mission was what mattered. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. Senior Chief Graves, this is Deputy Director Sullivan, DNI. I've been briefed on your situation. We'll be attending Article 32 hearing to provide operational context as appropriate. Your service is valued and your response was justified. Stand by for further contact. Eleanor read the message twice, then deleted it. Sullivan, that name carried weight in her world. If he was getting involved personally, that meant someone very high up was paying attention. That was both reassuring and concerning. Reassuring because it meant institutional support. Concerning because it meant the situation was going to get more visible than she preferred. But there was no going back now. The chess pieces were in motion. The system was processing the data. All she could do was trust the process and prepare for whatever came next. She finished her coffee and headed back to the SCIF. The China mission was complete, but there was always another crisis waiting. Another signal to analyze, another pattern to find. The mission always continued. Everything else was just noise. The next 10 days passed in a strange kind of limbo. The base was buzzing with rumors about the assault. The story had been twisted and exaggerated through multiple retellings until it bore only a passing resemblance to what had actually happened. Some versions had Eleanor as a trained assassin who had nearly killed 3 innocent Marines. Others had her as a victim who got lucky. The truth, as usual, was buried under layers of narrative. Eleanor ignored all of it. She maintained her routine with deliberate precision. She ate in the same dining facility, at the same table, at the same time. A silent statement that she would not be displaced or intimidated. The reactions from other personnel varied. Some of the junior enlisted sailors, especially women, looked at her with something approaching awe. Some of the raiders and other special operations personnel looked at her with suspicion or outright hostility. Most people just looked uncomfortable and avoided eye contact. Eleanor cataloged all of it with the same dispassionate observation she brought to everything else: data, context, patterns. Lieutenant Brennan's transfer was approved on day 3. He showed up at her workspace in the SCIF with a nervous energy and a determination to prove himself. Eleanor put him to work immediately on a new signals intelligence problem involving Russian electronic warfare activity in the Black Sea. She watched him work, noting his strengths and weaknesses. He was intelligent and eager, but he had a tendency to jump to conclusions before gathering sufficient data. She corrected him patiently, teaching him the discipline of waiting for the pattern to emerge, rather than forcing a pattern onto incomplete data. By day 7, he was starting to show real improvement. More importantly, he was starting to understand the culture of the SCIF, the quiet focus, the absolute priority of the mission over personal drama, the compartmentalization required to do this work effectively. On day 10, Eleanor received the notification. The Article 32 hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at 0900 hours. She was listed as the primary witness for the prosecution. Master Chief Wolf and Lieutenant Brennan were also on the witness list. The charges against Thorne, Cole, and Vance were substantial: assault, conduct unbecoming, communicating a threat. The recommended disposition was a full court-martial. Eleanor read through the charging documents with clinical detachment. The JAG office had done thorough work. Every detail was documented. Every piece of evidence was cataloged. The case was airtight. She knew what was coming next. The defense would try to paint her as provocative, mysterious, somehow responsible for Thorne's actions. They would try to make her the villain of the story. And then Deputy Director Sullivan would take the stand and change everything. Eleanor had seen her service record. She knew what was in it and what wasn't. She knew exactly what Sullivan could reveal and what would remain classified. She knew how the revelation would land in that courtroom. It was going to be devastating, for Thorne especially. She found herself thinking about the man he had been in Helmand Province, the terrified sergeant calling for help as mortars walked toward his position, the relief in his voice when she had given him the solution, the challenge coin he had sent months later, a token of gratitude to an anonymous operator he would never meet. That man had deserved to be saved. The man who had assaulted her in the training area was different, twisted by ego and insecurity in a toxic culture that had enabled his worst impulses. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in his coming fall, no sense of revenge, just a quiet recognition that correction was necessary and inevitable. The system was working. The pattern was resolving. The outcome was predetermined. On Sunday night, she prepared for the hearing the same way she would prepare for a mission. She reviewed all the evidence one final time. She rehearsed her testimony, anticipating questions and planning concise, factual answers. She laid out her uniform, ensuring every detail was perfect. At 2200 hours, Lieutenant Brennan stopped by her workspace. "Big day tomorrow, Chief." Eleanor glanced up from her screen. "Just another day, Lieutenant." "The evidence speaks for itself." "You're not nervous?" Nervous implies uncertainty about the outcome. The outcome is predetermined. 3 men assaulted me. It was recorded. They will face consequences. The only variable is the severity of those consequences. Brennan shook his head in amazement. "I don't think I've ever met anyone who approaches a court hearing like it's a math problem." "It is a math problem, Lieutenant. Evidence plus testimony equals verdict. The math is simple. Master Chief Wolf said something about you last week. He said you're the kind of person who could watch the world burn and still be focused on solving the equation." Eleanor smiled slightly. "Master Chief Wolf has a poetic streak I didn't expect." "Is it true, though?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. Lieutenant, emotion is a variable that introduces error into decision-making. I don't ignore emotions. I just don't let them control the process. Tomorrow, 3 men who made very poor decisions will face the consequences of those decisions. My emotions about that are irrelevant to the outcome. But you must feel something. Anger, satisfaction. Eleanor turned away from her screen to face him fully. What I feel, Lieutenant, is a sense of professional satisfaction that the system is working as designed. Thorne exhibited a pattern of behavior that was harmful to good order and discipline. That pattern has been documented and will be corrected. That's what I feel. Satisfaction that the institution is functioning properly. Brennan was quiet for a moment. You know, when I first saw you in that training area, I thought you were the most dangerous person I'd ever met. Now I think you might be the most principled. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Lieutenant. No, I suppose they're not. He stood to leave, then paused. Chief, I just want to say thank you for taking me on as your deputy, for teaching me how to do this work properly. I'm learning more from you in 10 days than I learned in 6 months of formal training. You're welcome, Lieutenant. Now go get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. After he left, Eleanor returned to her work. A new signal pattern had emerged from the Black Sea. Russian electronic warfare systems conducting tests. Another problem to solve. Another pattern to analyze. She worked until 0200 hours, then finally shut down her terminal and headed to her quarters. 4 hours of sleep would be enough. It always was. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather. Eleanor dressed in her service uniform with meticulous care. Every ribbon perfectly aligned, every crease sharp enough to cut. The silver star of a senior chief polished to a mirror shine. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw exactly what she wanted the world to see. A professional, a senior enlisted leader, someone who took the uniform and everything it represented seriously. She walked to Building 12, where the hearing was being held, arriving at 0845. 15 minutes early. Always early. Early was on time was late. The courtroom was already filling with people. She saw raiders in the back rows, their faces set in expressions of solidarity with Thorne. She saw junior enlisted sailors in the front, many of them women, their faces showing a different kind of solidarity. She saw Captain Victoria Ashford, the base commander, sitting in the gallery with her command staff. Ashford's expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Master Chief Wolf was already seated in the witness area. He gave Eleanor a slight nod. Lieutenant Brennan sat beside him, looking nervous but determined. At the defense table, Thorne sat between Cole and Vance. All three were in their dress uniforms. Thorne's right arm was in a brace. His face was pale, and he refused to make eye contact with Eleanor. Their attorney, Major Eric Dawson, was a Marine JAG officer with a reputation for aggressive defense tactics. He was reviewing notes with the kind of intensity that suggested he knew he had a difficult case. At 0900 hours exactly, the bailiff called the room to attention. All rise. This Article 32 preliminary hearing is now in session. The presiding officer is Colonel Henry Bradford, United States Marine Corps. Colonel Bradford entered and took his seat. He was a stern-looking man in his 50s with a chest full of ribbons and the bearing of someone who had spent 30 years making difficult decisions. Please be seated. This hearing will determine whether sufficient evidence exists to refer the charges against Gunnery Sergeant Rex Thorne, Staff Sergeant Cole, and Sergeant Vance to a general court-martial. The charges are assault, conduct unbecoming, and communicating a threat. He looked at the prosecution table. Commander Nash, you may proceed. Commander Patricia Nash stood. Thank you, sir. The government calls Master Chief Petty Officer Garrett Wolfe. The hearing had begun. Master Chief Garrett Wolfe took the stand with the deliberate precision of a man who had testified in military proceedings before. He was sworn in, identified himself for the record, and settled into the witness chair with the calm bearing of someone who knew exactly what he was about to say and why it mattered. Commander Nash approached. Master Chief Wolf, please describe what you witnessed on the evening of Wednesday, March 20th. Wolf's testimony was devastating in its clinical detail. He described observing Eleanor's routine in the dining facility over several days. He described receiving her encrypted message, suggesting he position himself near Grid Charlie 3 in the training area. He described what he and Lieutenant Brennan had witnessed from their vantage point. Senior Chief Graves was walking toward the satellite communications truck when Gunnery Sergeant Thorne and two other Marines emerged from concealment and surrounded her. The positioning was deliberate. They had clearly planned this encounter. What happened next? Gunnery Sergeant Thorne engaged in verbal harassment. He invaded her personal space. Senior Chief Graves remained calm and professional. She attempted to disengage verbally on multiple occasions. Did she appear threatening in any way? No, ma'am. She was carrying a laptop and attempting to proceed to her duty station. She was clearly trying to avoid confrontation. What happened when she told Gunnery Sergeant Thorne to remove his hand from her shoulder? Wolf's expression hardened slightly. He became enraged. He told her she didn't give him orders. Then he threw a punch at her face with full force. And how did Senior Chief Graves respond? Ma'am, I've been in the Navy for 30 years. I've seen combat. I've seen bar fights. I've seen trained operators work. What I witnessed was the most controlled application of defensive force I've ever seen. She neutralized 3 hostiles in approximately 12 seconds using minimal force and perfect technique. No excessive violence, no strikes to the head, just precise control and immediate disengagement once the threats were neutralized. Major Dawson stood for cross-examination. Master Chief, you said Senior Chief Graves sent you a message positioning you to observe. Doesn't that suggest she was planning this encounter? No, sir. It suggests she had assessed a potential threat and ensured witnesses would be present if that threat materialized. That's operational planning, not provocation. You also said she used perfect technique. Where would a signals intelligence technician learn hand-to-hand combat at that level? Wolf met his eyes steadily. I wouldn't know, sir, but I know what I saw. 3 Marines attacked 1 sailor. That sailor defended herself and escaped without causing serious injury to anyone. That's textbook self-defense. Dawson tried several more angles, but Wolf was unshakable. His testimony was clear, consistent, and damning. Lieutenant Brennan followed with similar testimony. His youth and obvious sincerity made his account even more credible. When Dawson tried to suggest that Brennan might have misinterpreted what he saw in the poor lighting, Brennan calmly pointed out that he had military training in visual threat assessment, and the encounter had occurred in sufficient lighting to observe everything clearly. Then Commander Nash announced they would play the body camera footage. The lights dimmed. On the large screen mounted on the courtroom wall, the scene played out exactly as it had happened. The audio was crystal clear. Thorne's taunts, his threats, Eleanor's calm responses, her 3 verbal warnings to remove his hand, the shoulder shove, the punch, and then the takedown. Even watching it a second time, knowing what was coming, the speed and efficiency of Eleanor's response was shocking. The courtroom was utterly silent except for the audio from the video. Thorne's grunt of pain, the sound of Vance hitting the asphalt, Cole's whoosh of expelled air, the generators humming in the background. When the lights came up, multiple people in the gallery were sitting with their mouths open. Several of the raiders who had been wearing expressions of solidarity with Thorne now looked uncertain. Captain Ashford leaned forward in her seat, her eyes fixed on Eleanor with an intensity that suggested rapid recalculation. Thorne himself had gone pale. He stared at the blank screen as if he could still see the image of his own humiliation frozen there. Commander Nash let the silence hang for a long moment. Then she turned to Colonel Bradford. The prosecution rests, sir. The evidence speaks for itself. Colonel Bradford looked at the defense table. Major Dawson, does the defense wish to present evidence? Dawson stood slowly. He had the look of a man whose entire strategy had just collapsed. The defense calls Gunnery Sergeant Rex Thorne. Thorne took the stand. He was sworn in and identified himself for the record. His voice was steady but quiet, missing the aggressive confidence that had characterized him in the dining facility. Dawson walked him through his service record. 15 years, 3 combat deployments, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, Navy Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat V. On paper, he was a hero. In practice, he was a man who had let his combat credentials excuse increasingly toxic behavior. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, please describe what happened on March 12, 2018, in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Eleanor knew what was coming. This was Dawson's play. Humanize Thorne. Remind everyone of his sacrifices. Create sympathy. Thorne's voice cracked slightly as he described the ambush. The mortars walking toward his position, the jammed communications, the certainty that he and his Marines were about to die. And then this voice came on the radio, calm, female, call sign Oracle. She said she had our solution. She gave us grid coordinates, told us gunship was inbound. 7 seconds, she said. He looked down at his hands. We got down. The AC-130 hit them. We survived. All of us. Because of Oracle. Did you ever learn who Oracle was? No, sir. I sent a challenge coin to an address I was given. Never got a response. Never knew who to thank. That operator saved my life and the lives of my Marines. Dawson nodded sympathetically. So you understand the value of support personnel, of those working behind the scenes. I do, sir. I absolutely do. Then why did you harass Senior Chief Graves? Thorne was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw. Because I was scared, sir. I'm facing retirement. Younger guys are better than me now. I can feel myself slipping. And this chief, she was so calm, so controlled, so completely unbothered by anything I said or did. It reminded me of Oracle. It reminded me that I'm dependent on people I can't see, can't control, can't understand. And instead of being grateful, I got angry. I tried to make myself feel bigger by making her feel smaller. So this was a misunderstanding. Thorne looked up sharply. No, sir, this was not a misunderstanding. This was assault. I put my hands on a senior chief. I threw a punch at her face. There's no misunderstanding in that. There's no excuse for that. Dawson froze. His client was testifying against his own defense. Gunnery Sergeant, I'm trying to help you here. Sir, with respect, I don't deserve help. I deserve consequences. Thorne turned to face Colonel Bradford directly. Sir, I'm guilty of all charges. I request maximum punishment. I know that doesn't fix what I did, but it's what I deserve. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Colonel Bradford banged his gavel. Order! Order in this court! Dawson sat down heavily, knowing his case was finished. Commander Nash had a slight smile. This was even better than she had anticipated. A full confession on the stand. But Nash wasn't done. She stood. Your Honor, before we proceed to sentencing recommendations, the prosecution has one more witness, a special witness to provide operational context regarding Senior Chief Graves' service record. A side door opened. A man in a dark suit entered. He was unremarkable in every way. Average height, average build, forgettable face. The kind of man you would pass on the street and never remember. But the way he moved, the way he scanned the room, suggested depths that his appearance deliberately concealed. He took the stand and was sworn in. He identified himself as Deputy Director Michael Sullivan from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. The energy in the room shifted immediately. DN, I didn't send deputy directors to preliminary hearings for simple assault cases. Something bigger was happening. Sullivan's voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of the courtroom. I'm not here to testify about the events of March 20th. I'm here to provide the court with a declassified, narrowly focused summary of Senior Chief Eleanor Graves' professional duties as they are relevant to understanding the context of her actions. He paused, his eyes finding Thorne and holding there. Senior Chief Graves is not a Navy SEAL. Her specialization is far more unique. She is a Tier 1 signals intelligence operator within a joint special mission unit tasked with clandestine electronic warfare and direct action support. To put it simply, she hunts enemy communications networks in denied areas and enables kinetic operations for our nation's most elite forces. A murmur went through the courtroom. Several raiders sat up straighter. Captain Ashford leaned forward even more. Senior Chief Graves has deployed 17 times to non-permissive environments over 12 years of service. Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, and locations I am not authorized to name. She operates alone or in two-person teams, often 50 to 100 kilometers from friendly forces, in territory controlled by hostile actors. Sullivan let that sink in for a moment. The skills she demonstrated in the body camera footage, the situational awareness, the threat assessment, the precise application of minimal necessary force, these are not optional extras for someone in her position. They are core survival skills refined over years of operating in places where a single mistake costs lives. Not just her life, the lives of the operators depending on her. He turned to face the gallery, addressing everyone now. Her call sign is Oracle. The reaction was immediate and profound. Thorne's face went white. His hands gripped the witness stand railing. Several people in the gallery gasped. The raiders who had known about the Hellman incident looked stunned. Sullivan continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. March 12, 2018, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Marine Raider Platoon Mako 3, led by then-Sergeant Rex Thorne, was ambushed by Taliban forces using coordinated mortar fire. Enemy communications were conducted on Russian-made frequency-hopping radios. The platoon's own communications were being jammed. They were 30 seconds from complete annihilation. Thorne was openly crying now, tears streaming down his face. A single operator positioned on a ridgeline 2.3 kilometers from Mako 3's position, using portable signals intelligence equipment, identified the jamming frequency within 90 seconds. That operator exploited a vulnerability in the enemy's communications protocol, triangulated the mortar team's position via electronic emissions, and transmitted targeting data to an orbiting AC-130 gunship. Sullivan reached into his pocket and pulled out a challenge coin, the same one Eleanor kept in her desk drawer. Time from Mako 3's request for fire support to ordnance on target was 7.2 seconds. Mako 3 survived with 0 casualties. The operator who saved them was Senior Chief Eleanor Graves. She received this coin in the mail 8 months later from an anonymous Marine. She kept it. She never knew who to return it to. The courtroom was absolutely silent now. Sullivan's voice dropped lower, but somehow carried even better. Senior Chief Graves' silence is not weakness. It is operational security refined over a career spent in places where speaking costs lives. Her calm is not submission. It is the discipline of someone who has held American lives in her hands and never failed them. He looked directly at Thorne. Gunnery Sergeant, the woman you assaulted is the reason you're alive to stand trial today. Sullivan stepped down from the witness stand. He walked out of the courtroom as quietly as he had entered, leaving behind a silence so complete that the air conditioning system sounded like thunder. Colonel Bradford cleared his throat. Does the defense wish to continue? Major Dawson stood slowly. Your Honor, the defense requests a recess to confer with my clients. Denied. Major Dawson, do you have any rebuttal to what we've just heard? No, sir. The defense has nothing further. Thorne stood abruptly. Your Honor, I request permission to address the court. Bradford studied him for a long moment. Granted. Thorne turned to face Eleanor directly. His voice was shaking. Senior Chief Graves, Oracle, I don't have words. You saved my life. You saved my Marines, men I would die for. And I repaid you by hunting you down, by putting my hands on you, by trying to hurt you. His voice broke completely. The confident, aggressive Marine Raider was gone. What remained was a broken man confronting the worst version of himself. I knew better. I've been saved by people I couldn't see, couldn't thank, and I still let my ego, my fear, my need to feel superior, I still let all of that turn me into someone who would attack the person who gave me my life back. He looked at Colonel Bradford. Sir, I'm guilty. I request maximum punishment under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I deserve nothing less. He looked back at Eleanor. And Senior Chief, I am so sorry. Eleanor's expression remained neutral. Not satisfaction, not anger, just professional acknowledgement. The system working as designed. Colonel Bradford announced a 30-minute recess. The courtroom emptied quickly, people needing to process what they had just witnessed. Eleanor remained seated. Commander Nash approached her. Senior Chief, that was the most effective piece of testimony I've ever seen. Sullivan just destroyed any possible defense they could have mounted. He told the truth, ma'am. That's all. That's all? Senior Chief, he just revealed that you're one of the most elite operators in the entire military. Your career as an invisible technician is over. Eleanor allowed a small smile. My career has always been about being invisible when it matters, Commander. This is a different kind of operation, one that required visibility to achieve the correction. Nash shook her head in amazement. You know, I've prosecuted hundreds of cases. I've never had a victim who treated their own assault like a chess game, where the outcome was predetermined from move one. The outcome was predetermined, ma'am. 3 men committed assault on camera. The math was simple. And the Oracle reveal? Did you know Sullivan was going to do that? I knew what was in my service record. I knew DNI would be notified. I knew Sullivan would provide appropriate context. The specifics were up to him, but the general shape was predictable. Nash laughed. You're terrifying, Senior Chief, in the best possible way. When the hearing reconvened, Commander Nash and Major Dawson presented a joint agreement. Thorne, Cole, and Vance would accept non-judicial punishment under Article 15 in lieu of court-martial. The terms were harsh: reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, restriction to base, and administrative separation from service with general under honorable conditions discharges. Their careers as Marines were over. Colonel Bradford accepted the agreement. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, you are hereby reduced to the rank of Staff Sergeant. You will forfeit half month's pay for 2 months. You are restricted to base for 45 days. You will be administratively separated from the Marine Corps. Do you understand and accept these terms? Yes, sir. Similar terms were imposed on Cole and Vance. The hearing was concluded. Justice had been served. As the courtroom emptied, Eleanor noticed Captain Ashford approaching. The base commander had the look of someone who had just had several assumptions fundamentally challenged. Senior Chief Graves, a word? Yes, ma'am. They stepped into a small conference room. Ashford closed the door. I'm going to be direct, Senior Chief. I've been commanding officer of this base for 18 months. In that time, I thought I had a pretty good handle on who my people were and what they did. I had you categorized as a signals intelligence specialist. Valuable, certainly, but not particularly notable. She paused. I was wrong, very wrong, and that concerns me, not because you did anything improper, but because it suggests there are things happening on my base that I don't fully understand. Eleanor kept her expression neutral. Ma'am, my work is classified at levels above your current access. That's not a reflection on you. It's just the nature of the mission set. I can tell you that everything I do supports the national defense and is conducted with proper authorization. I don't doubt that, Senior Chief. What I'm trying to understand is how to prevent this kind of incident from happening again. Not just to you, but to anyone. The culture that enabled Thorne's behavior is the real problem here. I agree, ma'am, Ashford studied her. You know what impressed me most about this whole situation? You didn't come to me directly. You didn't try to use connections or pull rank. You just documented everything and let the system work. The system does work, ma'am, if you feed it the right data. That's a very institutional perspective. I believe in institutions, ma'am. They're imperfect, but they're better than the alternatives. Ashford nodded slowly. I'm calling a base-wide formation for tomorrow morning. I'm going to address this situation directly. The culture on this base is going to change. I want you there. Ma'am, I'd prefer to maintain a low profile. I understand that preference, Senior Chief, but right now you're the most visible person on this base, whether you like it or not. Your presence at that formation will send a message. That message is important. Eleanor recognized this wasn't really a request. Yes, ma'am, I'll be there. The next morning, 1,500 personnel stood in formation under the Virginia sun. Eleanor stood in her designated position with her unit, as anonymous as she could manage in a sea of uniforms. Captain Ashford took the podium. Her voice carried across the assembled ranks with the authority of someone who had made a decision and would not be moved. We are one team, not Marines, not sailors, not soldiers, not airmen, one team. This base has failed that standard. A culture developed where some believe their contribution was inherently superior, where arrogance was tolerated, where respect was conditional based on job title rather than professional conduct. She paused, letting her words sink in. That culture ends today. I don't care about your warfare device. I don't care about your deployment history. I care about whether you treat your fellow service members with the respect they deserve as professionals committed to the same mission. Her voice grew harder. An infantryman's rifle is useless without the intelligence that tells him where to point it. A pilot's aircraft is a coffin without the maintainers who keep it flying. A special operator's life depends on a network of professionals they will never meet and whose names they will never know. Every single person here is critical to mission success. Respect will be based on conduct, not credentials. This is not a suggestion. This is an order. The formation was dismissed. The message was received. A new culture was being mandated from the top. Later that afternoon, Eleanor was walking back to the SCIF when she found her path blocked by Master Chief Wolf and 11 other senior enlisted leaders representing every branch and community on the base. Wolf spoke first. Senior Chief, we wanted to say something to you. As representatives of the senior enlisted leadership, he reached up and removed his Command Master Chief patch from his uniform. He held it out to her. One by one, the others did the same. Navy SEAL Trident patch, Air Force Pararescue patch, Army Ranger scroll, Marine Reconnaissance patch, EOD badge, aviation patches, submarine warfare dolphins, each representing years of training, sacrifice, and elite status. It was a silent offering, the ultimate gesture of respect from the senior enlisted community, an acknowledgement that she was one of them, regardless of what patch she wore. Eleanor looked at the outstretched hands holding these sacred symbols. For the first time since the incident began, genuine emotion crossed her face. A brief softening in her eyes. She brought her hand up in a slow, perfect salute to Wolf. Thank you, Master Chief. But you earned those. Just do me a favor. Make sure the lesson sticks. Wolf held the salute, his eyes meeting hers with understanding and respect. You have my word, Senior Chief. The salutes dropped. The patches were returned to uniforms. The gesture had been made and acknowledged. The culture was healing. 2 months later, the base had settled into a new rhythm. The raiders who remained had adjusted their attitudes. The junior enlisted walked with more confidence. The toxic culture had been excised like a tumor, and while the operation had been painful, the patient was healing. Eleanor sat in her alcove in the SCIF, Lieutenant Brennan at the adjacent workstation. A new mission glowed on her screen. Russian electronic warfare activity in the Black Sea. Another pattern to analyze. Another problem to solve. Brennan brought her coffee without being asked. Black, no sugar. He had learned. Chief, I've been thinking about the Thorn situation. Eleanor glanced at him. And? Was it worth it? The hearing, the exposure, everything that came after? Eleanor turned from her screen to face him directly. Lieutenant, I didn't do it for justice. I did it for correction. Thorn was a symptom. The culture was a disease. You don't treat symptoms, you cure the disease. She turned back to her work. The publicity will fade. People forget. But the correction is institutional. It's permanent. That's how you change culture. One documented incident at a time. That's surprisingly optimistic. I'm not optimistic, Lieutenant. I'm patient. And I'm very good at patterns. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Oracle. Mako 3 sends. You have our 6. Always. Thorn. Eleanor read it, considered it for a moment, then deleted it. She returned to her work. A new signal pattern was emerging on screen. Russian frequency hopping detected. Another threat to analyze and neutralize. She cracked her knuckles and leaned forward, her focus absolute. The mission always came first. The mission always continued. Everything else was just noise. Her internal monologue, the voice that had guided her through Syria and Afghanistan and a dozen other places that didn't appear on maps, spoke one final time. Pattern recognition, signal analysis, precision. Emotion is interference. Silence is survival. The system works if you feed it the right data. Correction over punishment. Proof over assumption. The mission never ends. Eleanor Graves disappeared into her work, into the electromagnetic spectrum, into the invisible war that never stopped. She was exactly where she belonged, in the quiet, in the dark, in the places between the noise, hunting patterns, protecting warriors, saving lives that would never know her name. Oracle was back on mission, and that was exactly how she preferred it.